Welcome to the Red Eye session of day 2, which is Breaking Boundaries, Building Futures, Women Entrepreneurs in the Global South. So, Red Eye sessions are designed to be provocative, to push boundaries, and you may be wondering how women entrepreneurs fit into this. But by the time our session is over, I'm pretty sure you will be convinced why we did this at all. I do want to acknowledge that the male of the species is missing from this panel. And this does not mean that this topic is only for women, it's for everyone. But when we were putting this panel together, we wanted to bring the best minds on this subject, and that's how we have our 4 panelists here. Women entrepreneurs, how and why are they different? This is the title of a World Bank study from 2018, which looks at how women entrepreneurs and female run businesses are different. And I think that's a great starting point for our conversation today to really frame it. A 2021 survey from the US shows that the number of female entrepreneurs has jumped up since the pandemic. It's now 49%. So they are leading the startup boom in the US. And of course, the number of female entrepreneurs in the developing world has been steadily rising. And this has been called pandemic related opportunity. But it is also because a lot of women are driven towards entrepreneurship because of economic reasons. Sometimes they cannot find jobs, and also because they're looking for flexibility because of care burden. Now, some of the differences between male and female entrepreneurs are obvious. Female businesses tend to be less profitable, and they also use less external finance. They are also predominantly in sectors of service, retail, and hospitality. At the same time, women of the world are running tech companies and media empires, businesses that work in aerospace and in defense and in DNA testing, and all sorts of new and innovative ideas. The one thing that remains is that entrepreneurship is increasingly seen as the universal solution for all the problems that we face in the global south. And there is no doubt that the global south can make huge gains by supporting women entrepreneurs and especially first generation entrepreneurs. I'm going to dive right in and I'm going to start with you, Luciana. The first question, of course, is for you to wear your G20 hat for a minute. The Indian and the Indonesian presidency had prioritized women entrepreneurship as the bridge towards women's economic empowerment. Is this something that Brazil will be taking on? And also, if you can tell us, do a bit of scene setting on what it is like for women entrepreneurs in Brazil.
First, thank you very much for the invitation to be in this panel. I have been a previous section of learning about my colleagues here, and I hope that this will be as empowering for you as it would be for me in 5 minutes that we have to talk there. About gender agenda and entrepreneurship and leadership from women, this is quite an important agenda for Brazilian G20 and T20. So this will be, as I said before in the previous section, cutting point of thinking about how we're going to put the gender agenda as a strong process and a strong leadership in doing Brazilian agenda in all task forces, but for sure to bring in this entrepreneurship and this women in trade, women as entrepreneurs as an agenda for Brazil also. Not only for Brazil, but for the continuing the debate about this. What we've seen in Brazil is the same of other Latin American countries and other Western countries. There is a lot of differences in paying. There is a lot of difference in leadership achievements for women. There is a lot of difference in access to credit and access to spaces of leadership in Brazil. And there's been a movement, a strong movement for women in Brazil to try to bring this to the agenda. So we have seen a growth in women leadership or in entrepreneurship, but it's not enough. Like we see the figures in Brazil is smaller than lots of other countries. We have less than 35% of our women in leader positions, although we have more CEOs than other countries, but when you look at the average, there are not many women in the leadership positions, and there are not many women that can say that they are paid exactly the same amount that men in the same leadership position. So there's been a strong movement for networking, and this networking has brings some important dialogues in Brazil, with dialogues with the private sector and dialogues in the public sector. So we've seen like strong leadership from some women that achieve this, like they are owners of huge enterprises in Brazil, or they are being like CEOs of enterprises, and they're bringing together lots of women to debate about how we can achieve this process. And the enterprises that are led by women are the one that has more women in being empowered. And this has brought also a debate about how we can bring policies, strong policies for women-led and entrepreneurship. So this networking process has been quite important. There are also been training and development programs, mentorship programs, and other government initiatives to bring this agenda back to the policies, bringing the gender agenda and empowerment of women to enterprise led by women as a process that will grow in Brazil. And I think that this is different from some other countries in the world. And I hope that we can learn in the process of sharing our experiences during the G20 and T20 process, so that we can bring this to the agenda. There is a lot of talking about care economy. It's a really important issue for Latin America and Brazil, because women are the ones who take the strong hours, and most hours are in women positions, women that are taking care of their families, women that are letting the labor market to take care of their families, the elderly ones. And we are just talking about how we can put this care economy as a process of bringing women to leadership and bringing policies that can let that the women go to the labor market, because the position is of women in labor market in Latin America is still less strong participation than men. And also we have the problem is that even when they go to the labor market, they're called secondary jobs. They're not the most important jobs. So bringing this to the agenda, the care economy is also a way of bringing the debate about how we can say that care is not a women job. Care is a societal and a government job and a political job, and we have to bring this to debate in Latin America. I know that this might be different in other countries, so sharing the knowledge, seeing how women get in STEAM and other positions that in Brazil is quite low, can bring us to how we can have recommendations for entrepreneurship and for women in leadership.
Right. And it's interesting for me, considering the workforce participation of women in Brazil is higher than that of men, but the challenges are pretty similar. And that brings me to my question to you, Nora. Of course, Luciana just spoke about how some of the social norms remain the same, the care burden being one. And she also spoke of networking, which is something that you work on professionally for women's leadership. And, when we talk about the cultural and social factors that impede women, it basically comes down to how women's economic participation is considered less important than that of men, and they just have to do more to prove their worth. So essentially, we're talking about centuries old patriarchy, which is still impeding women. Uh, what is your perspective as someone who works on this topic in the global south?
This is a very important topic, very passionate topic for me, because I look at women's leadership in the health sector. And health sector as well is a service area. And this is where you find a lot of women working in, and also seeing the disparities in terms of leadership positions and entrepreneurships. So when we look at social norms, these are big. They're huge issues that are drawing women back. And as we look at long-term economic development, it's a factor, of course, population growth as well as human capital. If you look at population growth, it's all around family choices, fertility. And when we look at human capital, it's the investment that we have cumulatively on children. What do we invest in their health? What do we invest in their education? So I just want to demonstrate exactly what happens when when we are held back by social norms and cultural issues that exist, and particularly in Africa, where we know that women are the backbone. They're the ones running agricultural, other health services, as well as small businesses. Now, there's an issue where what is the woman's place? It's in the kitchen, it's to nurture, and that is it. And where is the man's place? It's in the workplace. He exits the home and goes to work. And therefore, that is one factor where we look at the workplace designed for men. It is not designed for women. And we expect then women to engage in that same environment, and they have different challenges. So let me get into the challenges that women are facing, that you have been branded, that you're supposed to nurture, and you're a caregiver. It is unpaid work. If it's unpaid work, it means that having children is cheap because all you're doing is domestic work and taking care of a home. So if taking care of children is cheap, then fertility goes up. And when fertility goes up, it means that you're struggling with trade-offs of quality over quantity. So you have more children and you're not focusing on investing in their health or education, and particularly the girl child here. So we are seeing that the value of the girl child is very low. So why would you focus on the girl child? Therefore, education is not accessible for this girl, and they will be married off early. And that is where the cycle begins. Because without education, and we've seen research in Kenya saying that just one year of education will reduce the rate of genital mutilation that occurs. It will it will rather further the first child that a woman will get. It will reduce intimate partner violence. And it determines when you'll have your first child. And these are the things that are predisposing women to a position where they continue in a cycle where they're not valued, their work is not valued, and the cycle continues. Because then you're back in your place as a woman to take care of the home. The other barriers that we're facing, that women are facing as well, is the lack of investment in their work, as I've mentioned, but also in the institutions that they work. Then they face, of course, gender discrimination and lack of work-life balance, even when they get into the workplace.
In the midst of all this, I do
Yes.
want to ask you,
Yeah.
what is the role of networking? How uplifting or how essential is it?
Networking is very important, and that's what we've seen as well in our program in Women Lift Health, identified as one of the barriers that women do not have to engage and to learn from each other, because even with entrepreneurship, you need a role model. You need to see someone who had been doing it, you have seen their struggles, and women learn very well from fellow women. But then again, we also need male allyship. We need men to support women in the process, to be sponsors of women, to also mentor them and to also teach them. So networking is something that's really critical, that we find women do not have that space because they're caregiving, as opposed to the men who can easily go to the bar and grab a beer or go for golf or meet somewhere in the evening after work done. Women will always just be caregiving, running, and even the working one will be running back home, to engage in the nurturing and caregiving. So networking is very important, and that is where the role modeling and passing of knowledge and experiences happen that encourage women to engage in entrepreneurship. Yeah.
Okay. Huda, I'm going to turn to you now, and I think it would be a good point in this discussion to bring some hope into this. And I think hope can be found through technology. In India, for example, through a drive for digital financial inclusion, we've had more women open bank accounts, which has led to an uptick in access to credit, which means that there are more women who are now entrepreneurs. what role can technology play in supporting women entrepreneurs?
I think technology is playing a critical role in supporting women entrepreneurs. We're seeing this across the map, and we have to acknowledge the fact that in order to fix the issues that we have, we need to address the whole cycle and then contribute to the whole cycle, starting with women education and fields of technology and ending up to women leadership roles on the boards of listed companies and as well investment, I would say, funds and fund of funds globally. We're seeing at the moment a global rise to representation of women across the map. We're seeing a rise to a new norms of technologies. I don't know if you heard by the acronym FemTech, which is technologies that are being initiated by females and also impacting females' value field across the globe. Yes, our numbers are still growing, but we need to recognize that first and foremost, we are not the same across the different global representations or regions. We come from different global narratives and we have different statistics. I'll give you an example, and I think I gave it across early on. I come from the United Arab Emirates. I come from a space where the representation of women in STEM is in between 70 to 60%.
That's fascinating.
Exactly, and I think, of course, it dilutes when you get out of education system. You get less women in sectors of work where it's around 40 to 50%. And then later on in leadership, it gets even lower. Maybe on different representation of the boards at the moment in UAE, we have around 30% of women representation on the board, which is, I think, not the same, because when I went to study my undergraduate degree in France, I was amidst the 12% in the class, and I was in Denmark doing my PhD in cryptology, and I was amidst the 1-2% in the class. So you get to see the norms are not the same, and we need to acknowledge that there is a systematic motivation that exists within different cultures that might motivate women to take a lead job in technology in different regions. And I think a Global South have a really competitive advantage here, where if education was provided for women, then there should be, hopefully, a high appetite for women to join technology field. Why technology? Because you have, if you decided to get into entrepreneurship and technology, you have low barriers to markets and you have wider access to markets. If you looked across the globe today, the highest revenue companies globally are, can you guess what? They're either energy or technology or e-commerce, which is, again, technology. It's a map of over, I think, 5 trillion contribution to global market when it comes to technology. And the advantage of that is if you are investing in the field and investing in early startups and you know what you're doing, then you stand to gain almost 30x growth of your investment. But if you're investing, for example, in seeds A, B, and C, you have at least 10x growth. And it depends on the different markets, but I think an investment that would yield 10x to 30x is an appealing investment on a global structure. Most of the deals that happened in 2021 were actually towards technology investments for angel investors and in different markets. So taking that kind of knowledge, knowing that there is an investment appetite, and knowing that there is a low barrier of access to market is supposed to be a motivating factor, I think, globally for women to be part of the field. So does it translate in reality? Yes, but it depends again on markets. We've seen, for example, when I checked on the data that existed from the UNCTAD reports, there is a growth of female contribution in Africa and Middle East. And the report is saying that this appetite towards technology investments and women going towards technology investment has yielded or stand to yield almost $300 billion in terms of return for the market. I think that's a great revenue, and if we pushed for 50-50 representation, because we are not at 50-50 representation, we're at 20 to 30% representation in the field, then we can stand to even earn more returns across the map for that kind of GDP returns. One last point that I want you to take away from also this conversation is that an equal contribution to women into the world trade and economy would equal to an increase of 28 trillions US dollars into the GDP, and in 2025. Can you guess what's the contribution of AI in 2025? The stated report says if you have AI deployed across the map, then you can stand to gain 15 trillion USD. So a woman contribution in trade is higher than the productivity of AI into the GDP. So I think
You're
we need to
posing a
push
lot
for
of
that.
hard questions at an audience which has been hard at work since morning. But this has been fascinating to hear. And I do want to reiterate from what you said that the head start that Global South has in technology and the participation of women and girls in STEM, which is higher than the developed world. Of course, what is happening in UAE is fascinating. The difference in India, as we were discussing before we met, was that nearly 40% or more of women and girls take up STEM education, but as they enter the workforce, those numbers start dropping and get closer to 15%. So maybe that is something that we definitely have to fix. I'm going to now turn to Melissa. And of course, you work in South Asia, where there is just so much potential to propel women's entrepreneurship. But I'd like to hear from you about your experiences in Afghanistan, given the really rigid social norms there. How do women take up entrepreneurship, and with that, how do they end up challenging gender stereotypes?
Thank you. First, thank you to Samir and my esteemed panelists for the honor and opportunity to speak with you about such an important subject. I've spent the last 2 decades serving as a gender and countering violent extremism advisor to the United Nations, the European Union, and various global northern and southern capitals around the world, focusing on female labor force participation in various Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and ISIS strongholds. When I left Afghanistan 2 years as an advisor to the Afghan Minister of Peace, women were claiming their power. They were casting votes, pronouncing declarations in Parliament, issuing decisions in the Supreme Court, serving as pilots and police officers, and even running international businesses. I think one of the most intriguing patterns from my research as an advisor is our repeated failure to prioritize gender equity, particularly when the world agenda becomes convoluted. One of the genuinely addressing, I think, gender bias, structural discrimination, and women's labor is one of the first objectives removed from the strategic calculus. It's too often sidetracked from the most urgent, pressing issues, even though the empirical data repeatedly reveals it's a sine qua non, it's an essential part of the solution for growth, development, and innovation. Women comprise roughly half of the world's population and contribute to global stability. If they are unsafe or excluded, countries as a whole are worse off writ large, which can deepen the collective toll of economic instability, humanitarian emergencies, health crises, and refugee spillover. It's conventional wisdom in the global north. The one avenue to cultivate women's economic empowerment is to simply increase access to FDI, or social capital, and to create financial stability for households, resting on the supposition that enables families to rebound more quickly from shocks and to bolster national resilience. This is a powerful argument in its own right, but it leads to a myopic conclusion in countries like Afghanistan today. The Taliban's war on women is reminiscent of its reign in the 1990s, when the group imposed extreme measures by force. The Taliban, heavily influenced by hardliners, are using Afghan women's rights, the ability to work, and the girls' education as a bargaining chip in multilateral matters, such as international recognition, financial sanctions, and aid. It largely confines women to their homes under the patrilineal trap where society places a high premium on honor, ostensibly to protect chastity and reputation, thereby imposing harsh restrictions on how females must dress, work, and travel. The patrilineal barrier is far too powerful for all women to transcend. Nevertheless, many Afghan women entrepreneurs are learning how to effectively reconcile the priorities of competing interests in the country and beyond. Today, next generation Afghan female leaders are turning to technological infrastructure, virtual private networks and satellite internet, digital bank accounts, and cryptocurrency, not only to maintain access to education, but also to secure privacy and advance women's labor when the Taliban forbid females to work and study. In some
Right.
regions,
That is really pushing barriers, I just have to say. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing that. We're a little short on time with this session. I'm just going to open this up to the audience soon, but before I do that, I'm going to ask each of you to very briefly tell us, essentially, the session title is Breaking Barriers and Boundaries and Building Futures. How can women entrepreneurs do that? Your suggestions. Luciana, you can go first.
I think there is a crucial point is representation. It's not only representation as entrepreneurs, but political representation is also important. I've seen this in Brazil. When you have moving representation in all areas, the power of women, the representation of women grow, and then we can lead programs and political policies, public policies that empower women. So representation is as important as giving them money to open their entrepreneur and to do this. And we have this strong say in Brazil that our representation in some spaces, like in the executive, is growing, but you have to grow our leadership in other areas, like in the Congress, like in the CEOs spaces, like in the national agenda and the federation agenda. So I think
Representation.
representation is quite important.
I think it's very important for us to make sure that we have one-stop shop global resource hub for women, and particularly maybe only women. And maybe we should first empower women with the awareness of what they should stand to gain when they are getting access to those resources. So if I want some funding, I go to that one-stop shop globally, and then I get funding. Education, I get education, but that ecosystem should push me. If I don't know that I have to have a patent, then I have to have patent and ownership, because globally, if you don't have patent and ownership, accessibility to capital, it gets harder for you to provide a proper economic income across board. So that one-stop shop for me is very important, and I think breaking the barriers that exist to women. I just want to share that the Alan Turing Institute in London have issued that amidst all the AI startups that they have, 80% of investors would invest in all male startups. Can you guess how much were the share for all female startups? Lydia? Well, it's 0.3%, 0.3% for all female AI startup founders. So I think we need today that all women one-stop shop acceleration space where we can access abundance amount of resource funding, and that could be replicated globally.
So one-stop shop, basically building an ecosystem. Nora.
Great. Now that I was focusing on cultural issues, that's a hard one, and it normally creates a lot of anxiety. But these are the barriers we must violate. And I speak to the word we must violate this space. We must make women's leadership and entrepreneurship something that is institutionalized. It's not foreign anymore. So the more numbers we have of women getting into leadership positions, taking entrepreneurial positions or opportunities will mean that we create a collective. It becomes an example, a role model for other women and young girls that it is possible indeed. And the other call, of course, is for male allyship.
How do we do that? How do we put more women into leadership?
Or more women into leadership means that men have to give space. If a space is occupied, you cannot come and occupy.
That's fair.
It needs space. And the question is, Are men ready to let go of the power and privilege that comes with their position right there, so that we can move away from it and give space for women? So challenge to us all. Thank you.
All right, men give space to women for leadership. Melissa.
So I'm just going to bookend where I left off. Afghan women entrepreneurs are reframing and reconstructing leadership in the Taliban's current state of affairs. They're effectively using DPI and the unparalleled opportunities, such as learning how to code, to incentivize the Taliban to reopen schools for girls in select regions. But there's a strategic logic at play. Afghan women are using technological advantage and know-how and shrewd statecraft to inculcate the importance of a more consensus, egalitarian-driven approach to conflict resolution, digital transformation, and financial security.
Right, digital transformation. We have time to take on a few questions from the audience. Yes?
My name is Vera Torstensen from Brazil. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the panel. My question is, I'm an economist, and my question is, there's a lot of discussion about the idea or the act of valuing the work of women, caring. It's amazing, there's a huge discussion among economists if we can do this or not, or should we do this. My idea, how to value the work of caring, the work of women with children and the old parents and so on. The impact on the GDP is huge, it's 10%. So how about if T20, as a group of women in trade and investment, support the idea of putting this, the idea of valuing the work of women with care in the GDP. What do you think about this, the panel? Madam, the president of IPEA, and for the others.
Thanks. That question is clearly for Luciana. Samir, your question.
So I'm just going to read something out from 2017, the first time we hosted this discussion at ORF. One of my favorite women, Danielle Kayambe, wrote for us. Some of you may have met her in one of my events. She says, globally, it's estimated that women make 85% of consumer spending decisions. And when united as a market, represent the world's second largest GDP. In the US, they roughly control 50% of personal wealth, $14 trillion in assets, and are the primary breadwinners in over 40% households. Yet, despite possessing substantial decision-making and buying power, only 2% of venture funding is given to women-led companies. You heard Hoda mention the number, 0.3%. I'm reading out from 2017. Everything that I heard is something that we've been discussing now for close to a decade in terms of making that breakthrough and making in funds flow towards. So my question is, instead of just seeking representation and reservations in boardrooms or in parliaments or in positions of decision making, is it time to mandate finance companies to devote a certain stream of funding only to women-led enterprises? Is it time, like we have climate funding, green finance, SDG finance, is it time for women finance where only money goes into women-led enterprises?
I'm coming from a small country, and in my country we have a slogan: when the child does not cry, his mother does not feed him either. So yes, we need representation, but we need a voice to be represented. And my question is, in your countries or in your experience, what's your opinion about the positive discrimination? Or if they are examples of the positive discrimination on the frame of the legislation to help women to be elected, firstly, and to be supported by subsidies to increase their own companies. Because in some countries like mine, we have to fight about the rights. We don't have rights to...
Sorry, yeah, there's an echo, I think, on that side of the room. Is your question on positive discrimination?
Yes, and my question is, in countries that the females don't have the rights to on the land, so how we can find the way, not just to increase their representation, but to give them a voice for these rights? Thank you.
Okay.
2 quick points. One, thank you so much for this panel. I found it very, very relevant
even if we've been discussing it for a while, and I like the ideas you've presented. I just would like to remind us all that we have, if we look beyond women's entrepreneurship, there's a clear target G20 leaders' commitment to reduce women's labor participation by the gap, by 25% until 2025. And as far as I know, all G20 members are failing. So maybe this is the year under the Brazilian presidency leading up to 2025 to gain momentum to remind leaders of this commitment. And I just would like to also use the opportunity, because it's been very evident to me that the organizers have made an effort to ensure that there are plenty of female voices on panels, which is something I don't see in all conferences. So this is very, very worthwhile for the first inaugural Cape Town conversation. And I would like to thank the organizers for this approach, and let's take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Luciana, her question was about the Brisbane commitment to reduce workforce participation. So you have two G20 questions to field.
Okay. We are already represented by 3 women leading the Brazilian G20. I think this is something that we should stress. Is quite important for us as a saying and showing that we can be in this place. Yes, and besides that, for sure, to bring women from different perspectives and different countries to see that this leadership is spreading, but it's not easy. It's important for us to the Brazilians and other girls and boys and the youth see that they can reach this space. The girls can reach this space. So for us to put women in this space in Brazil, as you do here, will be quite important. And about the caring economy, for sure, we should do that, because I say that we can't have a slavery job, because we do 3 to 4 times more hours of labor, but we're not having a salary for this. And they're saying the men are the ones supporting the family. This is not true. So we have to change the discourse. We have to change the way that we are talking about care economy, for sure.
Hoda, I know you've been almost jumping out of your seat to answer his question.
Thank you, Samir, for bringing this on board. And this is exactly what I meant when I said we need one-stop shop where we can pragmatically build solutions and make sure that they are powerful solutions. So, I mean, I join my voice to yours, and that's exactly what I do across all the different initiatives that we have. If women need actually access to funding, we do seek funding and liaise that access to funding as soon as possible to women. And I would love to see the G20 maybe launching a platform for women funding, for women entrepreneurs, and for women across the map, because it might be also access to advanced science and technology, R&D, patenting structures, all of these barriers. We should really aspire to make sure all the barriers that exist don't exist anymore.
Melissa, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would just echo what has been threaded throughout various conversations over the last 48 hours or so. I think any meaningful approach will require a paradigm shift away from this false dichotomy of North versus South, state versus non-state, or public versus private. I think these binaries are important in their own right, but ultimately, we're dealing with an evolving set of power relations and new norms that lead to substantial changes in global relations. This requires a complete rethinking of policies and practices while incorporating many of what I've delineated by Afghan women emulating their statecraft. So I think in answering President Mbeki's call to action to reverse the broken promises, really, it's incumbent upon us to consider how the G20 system can build on India's more recent emphasis on women in leadership as we turn over the reins to Brazil.
Nora, the last word is yours.
The issue around caregiving, it's very critical. Honestly, women should be paid for it. Sometimes we've played with the idea of gender-based tax, that it should be different maybe for women as compared to men. And those are the things that we're trying to push and see, how does that work? How do we take care of women who are doing this extra work that is not paid for, that therefore undervalues them in the community? And, as I say, this is a vicious cycle. So we really need to support women on that endeavor and create policies that will support them to thrive.
Thank you very much. My name is Dunani Sani Matebula. Thanks for the insightful conversation. But I've got a problem. In your discussion, I couldn't locate a rural woman.
Sorry,
Sorry, you did
we
not
can't.
locate?
I didn't locate, in your conversation, I didn't locate you touching a rural woman. So I just want to ask a question. There are women, rural women, who don't have bank accounts. They don't know how to use technology. They live by selling vegetables or art craft. What I want to know is how do we bring them meaningfully
So women who do not have access to technology.
How do we meaningfully bring them into the economy? Meaningfully so that they contribute. You got me, sir?
On the informal workforce, understood.
Yes, thank you very much.
Vanshika.
So I have two quick questions. Firstly is, be it from an entrepreneurial lens or just a larger leadership and kind of talent pipeline aspect, how do you think institutions and policies can be better framed to support women in their career trajectory, keeping in mind also the life cycle of women and the challenges and opportunities that come with that, so if you invest early on and female talent is identified early on, then they can have a lot of quick wins that they can build on. But if not, then other challenges come in in the life cycle. So that's one. And second is talking about women entrepreneurship in particular. So I see a very interesting trend that I see more women who I know who are taking to their entrepreneurial journeys in their 30s, and more say male friends who I know who kind of jump into that journey in their 20s, which again means the age at which they're taking risk, whether it's working or not, and how they're pivoting is a different journey. And therefore there has to be also more tailored hand-holding and opportunities, as we know 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 entrepreneurs only succeed, right? So what safety nets can we put in place there?
All right, who wants to take those on?
I can start on the informal, what we call the informal work. Informal work, which is for Africa, that's where most of the women are in this agricultural work and, selling the vegetables. And what do we do about them? How do we bring them in? And I know that has been a gap where banks have not created products that are, serving the women. But we've seen a lot of innovation. I can speak to, digital financial services, considering things like mobile money. I can give an example of at least Kenya, and I'm seeing other countries also replicating the same, where mobile money has been used as a way of getting the informal sector to access, resources, funding, in the away from the banking system that has not necessarily adjusted or learned how to engage with the informal sector. We've seen in Rwanda where they've created some consumer protection laws where there's a law passed that there should be no gender discrimination in terms of access of these services, and this is supposed to take care of the rural folk.
It's
so I
very
think,
true for India as well.
Exactly. So across. So I think there are avenues that are being explored, and it's really just a matter of scale up and replication.
We have one question to go, but I'm going to take this.
This is easy. This is a yes or no question. I come from Latin America, from a developing country, and I think that one of the obstacles for access to entrepreneurship is the lack of education or the lack of access to education. So my question is, do you see in the near future with the gig economy, platforms, and globalization of works, do you see there's going to be a change in the years to come on the access to entrepreneurship? For example, there's a lot of tech talent over there that you don't need to formalize it through universities and university titles, and perhaps there can be access to these type of talents with now all the platforms and technology that's going on. Do you think that might change and make entrepreneurship for women more accessible?
It's definitely the current norm. We are seeing a global rise towards e-education platform. We even see the Ivy League universities joining in. You see a lot of Coursera kind of courses available for the mass for no credits, or which we need to change actually. No certification of credits if you don't want to pay, and certifications if you would pay. I mean, we should not associate that part with the payment. But we are seeing more and more of the global universities offering their services on a digital platform to make them available for the mass. But we still stand to lose towards your question, the people who are not connected. So we have to do our due diligence in creating novel solutions to improve reachability towards the people who are not connected in the platform, and making sure that we build proper incentives. It's not just about us shoving our own understanding of solutions down the throat of others, but also making sure that they are incentivized within their own custom system to seek the solutions.
That's a very important point. We had a question on policy.
Just to answer a previous question about property rights for women, I think it's that important. It's a recommendation for G20 and T20, as is representation on all things. To have them as the owner of land, of the owner of their house, and of the owner of their enterprises, as important as representation. That's just it.
Okay. Sorry. Why don't we have a global index that reflects on the competitiveness of economies to measure if women actually have property rights, if women actually have IP rights, and that should affect the global competitive index of each country globally? Then countries would be racing to make sure that actually they could improve incentives and provide incentives for women to do that.
Thank you. A big round of applause for our speakers.